because of what had happened to me. And I remember when I began to give my life to Christ, and you know, a lot of times people believe that God can deliver you from drugs and he can deliver you from that. But I serve a God that can deliver you from homosexuality as well. And I'm going to testify about that because the world don't like it. You know, they don't like it. They'll stone you for it, but he can deliver you from it. And so I remember giving my life. If you give whatever desires that you have, we serve a God that is able to take your desires and give you his. How many can testify to that? He can take your desires and give you his. And that's a part of my testimony. And so I began to go to church, and I remember my pastor doing an altar call, and he began to talk about this girl in the Bible. And I had never heard this story before, but her name was Tamar. And she was sexually abused by her brother Absalom. She was King David's daughter. And the Bible says that she was sexually abused by her brother Absalom, and she became desolate. She never went to fulfill the will of God for her life because of this abuse. This abuse had tainted her in such a way that the Bible said she began to rent her garments, which would signify her identity. See, the women in that day, they began to wear robes, and it signified their purity. And if someone was to take their purity, they were unmarriable. They were unable to get married. But she began to rent her garments, and the Bible says that she became desolate, and she never went to fulfill the will of God for her life. And so this support group, he began to talk about this support group that the church offered. It was a 12-week support group that really began to deal with different areas of her life. It began to deal with forgiveness and who am I and taking ownership. And it's a Bible-based support group. So I remember going through that support group, not really understanding, not really thinking that I may have really needed it, because one thing about trauma is that you want to forget that it ever happened. You don't even want to revisit it. You just want to move on with your life and pretend like that never happened in your life. And what this class called me to do is to deal with the roots of that trauma. And when we begin to go through those classes, it's as if God was removing layers of pain off of my life. And I was able to confront issues that I had never been able to talk about. And I ended up going through that support group, and then I ended up going through it again, and it was transformative in my life. It's like the things that I struggle with, it's like they instantly begin to break off my life, because I realized it wasn't about what I was struggling with, it was about the root trauma that I had gone through. And so I went through that support group, and I went through it a few times, and then over time I became a facilitator. So for the last 12 years of my life, I've been helping other people get free from what the enemy had me bound by. Don't y'all know that God will do it? He'll deliver you, and then he'll turn you around and allow you to go back and help somebody else in the same place that the enemy had you bound in. And so I spoke with my pastor, and I said, hey, I really want to bring this to Athens, because I went to church in Decatur. And so the first class that we had in Athens was full of nothing but young people. We had young people in high school who had gone through sexual abuse, and we were full of young people. We had men in our class. And I know that for men, sometimes that's hard, you know, because of pride or what. We've had classes full of men talking about the trauma that they've gone through, and getting free from that area of abuse. And so we brought it to Athens, and in January, we're going to be having that 12-week support group here in Athens, Georgia. Let's give God a hand clap of praise for that. And one thing about when God begins to deliver you, he begins to break the guilt and the shame. Because that's what trauma does. It causes you to walk in guilt and in shame, because you're afraid of how people are going to view you. You're afraid of what they're going to say about you. But what God does is he begins to deal with the guilt and the shame. And so there's a table in the back. And Pastor Shelley, if you can raise your hand. And then there's another young lady there by the name of Kalia. They're there, and they have all the information about this program. And so we want to bring it into churches. We're even discussing having a Spanish-speaking class just for those in the Latino